Who am I? I'm pretty average, the average age of a kid in foster care. From the majority background of kids in care, having experienced abuse and neglect from those meant to protect me, I am 9 times more likely to commit crimes, 25% more likely to get pregnant as a teenager, and there's a 30% chance that when I have children, I too will abuse them. This is who I am, until someone breaks the cycle.
Well, let's just give a warm welcome to Jason Bentsen.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Those are some pretty grim stats to hear right out of the gate. And not exactly the upbeat way I'd like to start my message, especially after the incredible worship set that we just had by Medic. I'm like fired up, and then we have like this kind of a downer video. You know, it's kind of a mixed bag of emotions there, but it really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? And we're going to talk more in a little bit about how we can break that cycle, but let me give you first a little bit of background on myself and my wife, and how I kind of came to be here today. Well, not how I came to be here. That's another talk for another day. But anyway, you guys get what I mean. Growing up, I knew a few people who had adopted or had fostered, but I didn't really understand necessarily the why behind some of those things. I didn't know, family background or histories or anything like that, what children may experience when they've grown up in orphanages. My wife and I, when we met in college, and I still remember the day when we talked about children while we were dating, and we both talked about how we'd both like to adopt someday. We just thought that would be kind of a cool thing to do one day. But we didn't realize that it would be the way that God would build our family. And God built our family. Fast forward to 2009, we've been married to each other for about 9 years at this point, and we decided it's time to go ahead and start this adoption process. And 6 months later, we had a little boy in our arms. Still the fastest adoption that I've heard of to date from anyone. I mean, as many adoptive families as I've talked to, 6 months, start to finish. But God used that experience to light a fire in me, to start something. And I had no idea at the time what that would end up being. It started out initially as a desire to really help families afford adoption. After all, we'd just been through this infant adoption. It cost thousands of dollars, and so I understood the expense that went with it. And through that, I also found out how many Christians actually entertain the idea of adoption. Did you know that almost 40% of Christians have strongly considered adopting? 40%. And yet, it's only 5% actually do. And it's typically, very often, it's because of expenses or the finances that go along with it that hold people back from going forward with adoption. But, see, I discovered a couple of things along the way. That, number one, when God calls you to something, He provides for you. I have not met an adoptive family that has not had the finances come through for them to be able to finalize that adoption. I've not met one. God has provided for them every step along the way when they step out in faith and obedience to what God has called them to do. The second thing that I found out is that there's some great organizations out there that are helping with the financing of adoption. Organizations that offer grants and interest-free loans. And so I found that problem to kind of be solved. That's not really a problem that exists anymore. So back to me and my story, or as my son likes to say from his favorite show, Lab Rats, let's talk about me. Let's talk about me. We'd moved away, we'd done some church planting, we moved back to the Chicago area. Now we've got a 2-year-old in tow with us, and we wanted to adopt again, but we really needed some time to heal from a failed adoption. And that was difficult. I share that as part of my story because sometimes that happens. And there's always pain that's associated with any adoption because there's a break in the family system, right? Somebody doesn't get to be with their biological family. And that's hard to reconcile. And so we had to heal from this time that we had this failed adoption. And so we began to do some ministry at our church and educating families on different avenues that they could jump in and get involved, whether it be through foster care or domestic infant adoption, international adoption, safe families for children. And we started a play group for foster and adoptive families where kids could come and play together and parents could hang out. And we did our best at trying to start a support group as we had heard that and seen that there were families out there who needed some support. And as time went by, we decided that it was time that we adopt again. And God had really changed our hearts through these number of years from getting a child for our family to really giving our family to a child. And there's an important distinction there. There's an important distinction because, I mean, really, when we talk about, like, which of us needs another kid to fight with at bedtime, right? I mean, like, at our house, it's like our kids don't even know what bedtime is. You know, like, they've never done it before. Like, bed, I don't want to do that. No, what? No, you know, it's like a hostage negotiation in reverse. Just like, what do you need? You guys need a helicopter? You need some candy bars and unmarked wrappers? Like, anything. Just stay in your room, please. Like, that is bedtime at our house. Who needs another one of those, right? No, I mean, I'm kidding, but to some degree, I'm serious. Otherwise, you know, there's humor in that truth, isn't there? And there's nothing wrong with wanting to add to your family. I mean, that's how God, you know, created our family. We wanted to add to our family. But God had also shifted our focus and understanding and wanting to provide our family to a child. And the other thing that we came to understand is that it takes a lot more than just love for some of these children. It takes a whole lot more than just the willingness to love a child and for us to expect that they're just going to fit in with our family and just go with the flow and get on with it. No, these kids, many of them, really need intentional, generous, compassionate, patient parenting. And it usually involves a whole lot more than just love. So we decided to adopt again, but this time we figured we're probably going to have to wait a little longer than 6 months. I mean, 6 months, that was like 3 months shorter than most of you guys have had to wait for your kids. You know, it was fast, right? And so we're like, oh man, now we're going to have to wait for forever. We did. It ended up being quite a bit of a wait, but we had a couple of different opportunities come our way, and some of those different opportunities, those birth parents ultimately decided to parent. And again, that was really painful. That was hard because our heart had already gone in front to love this child and welcome this child into our family, but we also knew that this was a wonderful opportunity for this child to remain with their birth family. And we celebrated that at the same time. So while we waited and continued to wait for nearly 2 years, God really used this time to turn our hearts to children in foster care. And we discovered that there's over 13,000 children in foster care just in the state of Illinois. And 3,000 of them are available for adoption right now. Orphans right here in our backyard. Nearly 2 years after we started the adoption process, God provided us with our daughter, and she's awesome. She's 3 years old. She's over in one of the classrooms over here right now. She's a little spitfire. We love her to death. And through that time, God made it clear that He wanted us to start a ministry for foster and adoptive families. And as I looked around the country and talked to different organizations and leaders of some of those organizations, God made it clear how He would intersect my passions with the problems that we're seeing and what the need was out there. I didn't see any organizations quite doing what I felt like God had laid on my heart. And, you know, my passion was really to solve the problems surrounding foster care because, I mean, honestly, when it comes to infant adoption, there are more families waiting to adopt an infant than there are infants available for adoption. That's a problem solved. Everybody wants a baby. But what about the kids that are waiting? So I really wanted to engage the church in this mission around this passion, and I didn't see very many organizations doing that. And so the problem, if you're taking notes, the problem is that both foster and adoptive families often feel misunderstood, frustrated, and alone. Again, the problem is that foster and adoptive families often feel misunderstood, frustrated, and alone. Misunderstood for the reasons for them fostering or the reason that they decided to adopt. Misunderstood for maybe the way that they parent or the kinds of things that they experience. The tension they feel with loving children that are in their home and desperately wanting them to be able to go home to their biological parents when they're fostering these children. But not wanting them to go home at the same time. They feel frustrated with the foster care system. They feel frustrated with the amount of paperwork it takes to adopt, with some of the behaviors that their children are exhibiting. They feel frustrated with people not understanding and not knowing what it's like. They also feel isolated. They feel alone. They feel like they're the only ones who feel like they do. No one understands what it's like. No one experiences what I experience. No one seems to really care. Nobody really wants to help. And they're in this all alone. So listen, 50% of foster families quit after just 1 year. 50%. Due to a lack of support. Because it's hard. No wonder the foster care system struggles like it does. People communicate with their actions, and their actions are saying, you know what? I don't feel like we can do this without support. And we don't have the support we need to move forward. So today, on Orphan Sunday, a day where many churches are celebrating adoptions and foster care and encouraging people to jump in, which they should. Adoption is beautiful, right? There's redemption in adoption. It's biblical. We're going to talk about that in a minute. There's also pain associated with it. But today I want to share a story with you. A little story about this man who one day walked out to the end of a very long pier. And he walks out to the edge, and there's a crowd of people back on the shore yelling at him, "Jump, jump, come on, jump." And he gets closer to the edge and gets his toes maybe curling over the edge a little bit, and now the crowd gets a little bit bigger and gets a little louder. "Come on, jump, jump, jump." Now there's marching bands, and people are holding banners, and they're wearing matching T-shirts, and the crowd gets bigger, and they're jump, 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 and he looks back, he's like, "I think I'm going to do it," and now there's thousands of people, and the crowd's getting to this big roar, "Jump, jump, jump," and he decides he jumps in. And at that moment, he realizes this water's freezing cold, I can't touch the bottom, and my gosh, I don't even know how to swim. And he's yelling, "Help! Help! Help!" And there's silence. There's no one. And he's yelling, "Help!" And finally, there's one person breaks the silence in the crowd and they said, "We don't know how to help. We only know how to say jump." For years, the church has become increasingly involved in encouraging families to foster and adopt, but very few are equipped or prepared for what comes after these families follow that call. And again, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. Most of the time, people don't know there's a need, or if they are, they really don't know how to help, what to do. So what should we do? What do we do? Should we stop encouraging families to foster and adopt? The answer to that is a resounding no. Absolutely not. James 1:27, a verse that so many people point to, as a reason that we should not stop entering into the foster care and adoption system. James says, "Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you." Pure religion is caring for orphans and widows. The NIV says it's the kind of religion that God accepts. In Isaiah 1:17, God says, learn to do good, seek justice, help the oppressed, defend the orphan, fight for the rights of widows. The prophet Jeremiah says the same thing. Over and over throughout Scripture, we see God's heart for the orphan. Deuteronomy is just littered with phrases about the fatherless and how he defends and cares for the fatherless and brings justice to them. How his anger burns against those who harm them. No, we can't turn our backs on this issue. In fact, we need more people to jump in and foster and adopt. Because this is the very heart of God. But what do we do about those families who do decide to jump in? What do we do when we don't feel like we're the ones that are called to do this? We're not the ones that should foster or adopt. What do we do then? We just say, hey, it's up to you. Good job. Thanks, and pat them on the back. See, I believe that not everyone should foster or adopt. But everyone can do something. All of us can do something. We are all called to care for the orphan and the widow. These are the most vulnerable in our society. These children that are growing up in foster care, the orphans in our backyards, are the most vulnerable. For us to be truly God's representatives here on earth, to be Jesus here on earth in our community, it's for us to care about the orphans in our community. See, this isn't the job of a select few. It's the job of God's people. It's all of our jobs. And see, when our awareness level is raised, we know that caring for these children around the world is something that we ought to do, that we must do. Then we have to look this problem, we have to stare it dead in the face, and we have to decide whether or not we're going to do something. Whether or not we're going to get involved. Do we get involved and do we break that cycle? Or do we sit idly by and let that cycle continue? These children, we don't know what hangs in the balance of our decision of whether or not to get involved. We never know. We have no idea what impact we might make or we might miss out on in the life of a child if we choose not to get involved. The difference between a child becoming another statistic, like we saw, or growing up loved and cared for and knowing the love of our Father has everything to do with our decision of whether or not we're going to get involved and do something about this. So that's why we started Love Moves Us. Love Moves Us exists because the gap that exists between what the foster and adoptive families need and what the church is providing, it's far too wide. It's far too wide. Families are looking for community. They really want to be around people who families that look like theirs, children who look like theirs. They want to be around people parents who have similar experiences as they do, whose children behave like they do. Parents who understand what it's like to foster and adopt. People who understand why they parent the way that they do. They're looking for their people, people who get it. That's what I hear all the time. I hear from families like, oh man, I finally found my people. My people. Because at the end of the day, isn't that what we all want? Isn't that what we're all looking for? We're looking for a community of people where we feel like we belong. We're looking for our people. Someone who gets us, someone who doesn't judge us, but who listens to us, who supports us, who befriends us. Because we all crave community, right? We're all looking for community. We're all looking for people who have had similar experiences as we've had. That's why there's support groups that exist around different issues, right? That's why there's support groups around parents who have lost children. That's why it's refreshing to talk to somebody who recently lost a loved one. That there's healing in community. God refreshes our soul in those times. Families need encouragement. Families need support. They need to know that they're not in this alone, but that they can get through the hardships and they can get through the frustrations. and the difficulties that they're experiencing. See, it's ridiculous for foster and adoptive families to languish and struggle through some of these things in isolation. It's ridiculous. It's terrible for them to feel all alone. And so, Love Moves us, we don't want families to struggle. We want to see foster and adoptive families flourish. We want to see them encouraged. We want to see them supported. We want to see them in community with each other so that they can get through those trials and those difficulties that they experience that are unique to that situation. So we started what we call family gatherings. Small groups of foster and adoptive families. And what we really want to do is we want to see more of these family gatherings, more groups in more locations to serve more families. That's what we want to do. More groups in more locations to serve more families. And here's the way we do that. The solution to our problem is simple. The solution is to breathe life and love into foster and adoptive families through service and support. We can breathe life and love into these families, into foster and adoptive families, through service and support. We're engaging the community, we're engaging churches, agencies, individuals to serve and support foster and adoptive families so they don't struggle, but flourish. So practically, what does that look like? There are a few things that happen at family gatherings. First, it's for the whole family, as the name suggests. So it's not rocket science there. We want fathers involved in this too, because honestly, when it comes to social services and ministries around orphan care, far too many of them, it's mostly the women that are involved. We're the dads, we're the men. And sometimes some of these ministries and things are focused more on the women because naturally they're led by women and that's how they think. And so guys don't think they can be a part of it, or it's just not, whatever they're doing doesn't look like it's attractive to them. And we want to engage dads. We want dads. We want the whole family. After all, like dads, that's half the parenting force right there, right? I mean, in the wise words of the poet Rob Bass, it takes two to make a thing go right. So we bring the whole family together, bring everybody together, and we take two of the biggest barriers away: food and childcare. Most families, those are the two biggest barriers. I got to get my kids fed. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get there on time, or what do I do with my kids? I can't get anybody to babysit or whatever. We eliminate all that. We're just like, just get in the car and come. Just come, just show up. We're going to feed you, your whole family, everybody. We're going to feed our volunteers, and then once you get here, after we feed these kids, we're going to hand them off to some of our volunteers. And they're going to lead the kids through some games, and the kids are going to play together and get to know, make friends, and see families that look like theirs and other kids that look like them. And it helps build their identity. And so the parents, after they hand their kids off to the volunteers, they get to eat together. And there's community that happens when we share a meal together. And then we move into a little small group time in the living room, and we discuss topics that are relevant to parenting and foster care and adoption. And we watch small segments off of a DVD, usually 2.5 minute, 5 minute segment, two of them, and give parents some tools that they can take home and begin to implement right away in their parenting to help them build more trust and build more connection with their children that they're caring for. See, many of these children have experienced trauma in one form or another and at varying levels. That trauma, things that they should never have had to experience translates into their behavior. Many of these kids have never been able to trust because the very people in their lives that they're supposed to be able to trust, they couldn't. They never provided for them. These kids that are in foster care, it's because they've been neglected or abused. These aren't bad kids. These are kids that have had bad things happen to them. Their lives, they feel like they're out of control. Now they just go be placed and live with a stranger. What would happen to you if you were 7 years old and you had to be separated from your parents and you're just go live with these people now? That'd be traumatic. Many of them have experienced scary things that you and I have never experienced. And so it shouldn't be any surprise that they literally can't trust sometimes. They can't trust. Sometimes they're fearful Or they're trying to control situations. And it's usually one of those three things that's behind the behavior that we're seeing. And too many of us, we're looking at the behavior of the child and we're like, stop it. Knock it off. Behave. Sit down. Be quiet. And the things that are going on in their minds and in their feelings, we can't see or experience those things. But what's typically behind those behaviors has to do with an inability to trust, they're scared, or they're just trying to control because they're freaked out. So we give parents tools they can use to build trust and connection. We give them an opportunity to discuss their experiences and bond with other families. And then we pray for everybody in the room. Take prayer requests and pray for everyone. See, when you hear about the 13,000 kids in foster care in Illinois, or the 500,000 children in foster care across the U.S., or the millions of orphans around the world, what do we do? Where do we start? You might be tempted to say, what can I do with that? What am I supposed to do to make even a dent in that, Jason? But that should never keep us from acting. See, I love what Andy Stanley says. He says, do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Just do for one, just one, what you wish you could do for everyone. If you could snap your fingers and change the situation of all these thousands of kids or millions of orphans around the world, what would you do for just one? Just do something. And that's how Love Moves has started. We started with just one group at our home to provide encouragement and community and support for foster adoptive families. We'll see where this leads. We'll start with one. Let's do it for a few. A year ago, we had just one family gathering. It was our largest to date at that point. We had 60 people in the house. Yeah. 24 adults, 30 children, and 6 volunteers. Thankfully, it was at one of my board members' houses. It was a little bit bigger than mine, so I didn't have to destroy my house. But we knew right then and there that we needed a second gathering, because that's not a small group, right? We talked about, like, we move in a living room for a small group. That's not a small group. We needed a second one right away. Fast forward a year later, we've started 5 groups since then in a year. We've been able to serve over 80 families and 180 children just this year in the first 10 months. We've engaged volunteers to serve over 300 hours and served meals to 1,200 meals, essentially, is what it translates to our volunteers and the children and the adults that attend every month. We've doubled or more than doubled everything we did last year. Next weekend, we're going to serve probably between 160 to 200 people at 5 different locations. We've even had one family that credited us with finding their daughter. I'm like, that's not even what we do. We're not an adoption agency. We had a family, I sat down with this guy for lunch, and he's like, they had started in the adoption process. They had started coming to our family gatherings, and their adoption ended up falling through. And they were devastated. They were hurt. But they were so thankful that they had a community around them that could support them, other people who knew what that was like, who had walked that road before and could put their arms around them and walk with them and support them through this. And so they kept coming to the family gatherings, even in spite of that, and they met this other lady at one of our family gatherings who worked closely with an orphanage over in China, and that's where they were trying to adopt from, was China. And this lady connected them with the director of that orphanage over in China. And that director connected them with the little girl that they're bringing home here at the end of the month, in just a couple weeks. They said they would have never had their daughter had it not been for Love Moves Us. I'm like, that's God. God does that stuff. We started another family gathering out in Shanahan, and we had this lady that was following us online on social media and Facebook, and when she found out we were starting one there, she was so excited because that's where she lives. It's her hometown. And she registered for the family gathering and realized that the host location was directly right around the corner from her. She literally walked over to the family gathering. And she started fostering these 2 little kids, a 5-year-old little girl and her little infant sibling, this 5-year-old, this home was her 11th placement in a year. Five years old. She should never have had 11 placements to begin with, much less in 1 year. But now this family has support right around the corner. And what's even more beautiful was that the host family's little girl really befriended this little 5-year-old girl. And so for the first time, there was just hope and excitement around the opportunity that hopefully this girl can stay in this family and have some permanence and be able to build some trust, because this little girl's also got a friend that lives right around the corner from him now. Another family that showed up to, two families actually, that showed up to a family gathering one time. They were both fostering little girls, and the little girls end up knowing each other. These families didn't know each other. They just showed up, and these little girls, they were so excited to see each other because they had met a long time back. They had met at a camp and hadn't seen each other since. And so they were so excited to see each other, and they could stay and play together for the next couple of hours, and that might not have ever happened again because these girls were in foster care. They might not have ever seen each other, but they got to play and connect, and now these families know each other. So today I ask you, what can you do? What can you do? What will you do for one that you wish you could do for everyone? See, it's a simple next step to do just something for one child. Do something for one family that you wish you could do for them all. Your role, again, if you're taking notes, your role, if you've not adopted or you're not fostering, your role is to serve and support those families who do. It's real simple. Serve and support foster and adoptive families. Serve and support foster and adoptive families because they need you to be Jesus to them. That's what they need. They need you to serve and support them while they follow God's call on their lives to care for these children. There's a few things that you can do. First is simple. You can just give. Give to organizations like Love Moves Us, to support our work. Give directly to these families so they can have a night out or get their kids enrolled in some extracurricular activities. They can help them afford therapies that maybe they need. But give generously and support the work that God's called them to do. Giving to Love Moves Us directly supports families and engages others to serve and expands our impact. Or you can volunteer. Volunteer your time. Volunteer to host a family gathering. Volunteer to provide your home and the environment for families to be able to get the encouragement and the community and the support that they're looking for. Volunteer to work directly with the children during one of these family gatherings. See, it's the volunteers that really drive the ministry. And these kids, they come to our family gatherings and they are so excited. They love it. They get to play together. We had one family that their kids call it the adoption party. That's what they go to every month. Are we going to the adoption party? They love it. They look forward to it. And it provides an opportunity for these children to heal, to build a strong sense of identity, and to connect with other children that look like them, whose families look like theirs. Volunteer to serve another family directly. You can make a meal, clean their home, buy some groceries, mow their lawn, or I guess it's getting colder now, shovel their driveway, rake their leaves. Just do something. What would you want to happen to you if you're busy and you're trying to care for some children, and you're struggling along with some difficult things right now? What would you want somebody to do? What would be meaningful to you? Do that. But volunteer. Don't sit on the sidelines. You'll miss out. Third thing you can do is some service projects. We have a variety of service projects that you can do that will directly impact and go to families. You can organize them for your church, your small group, your community, but they will make an impact. And the last thing that you can do is to pray. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, pray. And pray fervently. Don't just say, okay, Jason, this is my next step today. I'm going to pray and forget about it. No. Mark it down. Make that appointment. Pray. Pray for these families. Pray fervently. Get to know the families. Ask them what their needs are. Ask them how you can pray for them. what you can do for them. Pray for them constantly. Listen, what would this community look like if everyone in this room decided today, we're not going to let the devil win this one? We're not going to let him destroy these children. We're going to step up. We're going to stand up. We're going to get involved. Even if I'm not the one that's called to foster adopt, I can do something. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to support those families who do. I'm going to serve those families who do. I'm going to help them. I'm going to make sure that they don't struggle, but that they're going to flourish. See, I can make a difference today. We together, as collectively as a community, can make a much bigger difference together than any single one of us going off and trying to do one of these things on our own separately. You never know. You never know what hangs in the balance of your decision for whether or not you're going to get involved. That next child that could be abducted into sex trafficking, keeping a child off the streets, keeping a child out of jail or off of drugs. You never know. All those things are directly linked to children who grew up in foster care. Did you know that? A sex trafficking raid nationally by the FBI found that 70% of the children were child victims had been previously in foster care. These are the most vulnerable in society. They're preyed on. We can get these kids into Christian homes that are loved on, that they can find some permanence. They can know the love of the Father, that can build their self-confidence and their self-esteem and their identity to know who they are, but whose they are. Amen. We can make a difference. You never know what hangs in the balance of your decision for whether or not you're going to get involved. See, the only thing that changes after we leave here today is you. There's nothing different in these children's lives, nothing different in these families' lives. Your income isn't different. You don't have any more time on your hands. You don't have a different job. The only thing that's different is that you now know. And you have to decide what you're going to do. If you're going to sit this one out, or if you're going to get involved, get in the game, and make a difference in the name of Jesus. We can make that difference together, and we can break that cycle. Let's pray. God, thank you for what you've done in our lives, for the redemption, for the salvation, for the adoption into your family, that we can be sons and daughters of the King of the Most High. God, I pray that you would help us to look today at what next step we can make, whether we're going to serve or whether we're going to support, whether we're going to give, we're going to volunteer, we're going to pray, that we can break that cycle. In Jesus' name.